Yeah, okay. I believe that we might start as recording runs, and I hope that many people are looking at us and listening at us. I start the conference on cyber risk and management in M&A transactions. So cyber risk, this problem is known to many people and has a big awareness, and management M&A also, but on the combination, my impression was that this is an issue which is a very special one, and there are many questions, and there are very few people who really have experience on that, and I'm very happy to have here colleagues with an extremely high experience. And I give a brief introduction. First, Paul Harragan. Paul is EY Director on Strategy and Transactions. He is head of team for information security, cyber defense, and IT transformation. He has advised both private equity and corporates on cybersecurity risks and transformation across the capital agenda in more than 200 projects. I do not know anyone who has made more projects on this topic here as you did, and so I'm extremely happy to have you here, Paul. Then second, Michael Popp, a good old friend and very well known in the M&A community, especially in the German M&A Association. He is Senior Director, Corporate Development and Strategy at SAP SE, an expert on software business, software ecosystems, and mergers and acquisitions. Member of the Bundesverband M&A, recently published a book titled Automation of Mergers and Acquisitions. And myself, I'm Kai Lux, former Siemens AG, worldwide medical and energy businesses and infrastructure projects, head of corporate strategy project, corporations, M&A strategy and integration, and the founder and president of the German M&A Association. So the schedule for today is, as we have 40 minutes for our virtual podium discussion, I thought we define some topics. Within the topics, we are quite open, and this is just a rough framework. And the first topics we would like to discuss upon is the question about awareness. What are impacts and risk assessments on cybersecurity M&A? First question is to give some deeper insight, some war stories, and I think the most heavy one was the Marriott Starwood case. Who of you would like to give a short insight on this case? Would you like to do it, Paul?
Yeah, no problems. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm humbled to speak to the crowd here. Yeah, so definitely the Marriott Spg merger that took place back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, is probably the biggest use case for corporate M&A and cyber risk. It's a case where simply cybersecurity diligence wasn't effective. It didn't really take place. And to put the scenario into context, Marriott wanted to grow their geographical presence, so they acquired SPG. Cybersecurity diligence didn't take place, and on day one of the merger, it turned out that SPG had been breached in months beforehand. And so when the merger took place, Marriott were made aware of the breach and automatically took the responsibility of the breach, even though they just acquired them. And that breach left kind of over, I think it was over 100,000 user PII data, which left the business in plain text, and therefore they were automatically sanctioned to Privacy Data Protection Acts and GDPR, etc. So the fine that came out straight away was really large, and they're still paying those fines today. I think automatically the share price immediately dropped as well. So it had a big impact to the investors upon the upon the day one of the merger. So it's a real big use case study for cybersecurity awareness in M&A, just to show you kind of what not to do. But they would just prove negligent. They simply didn't care at the time to put in the effort. They did do IT diligence, so they understood the technical landscape. They just didn't do the cybersecurity and information security due diligence on the asset to understand the risk position.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul. We just begin with the awareness question. After that, I would invite the audience for a poll. But first, we should get an awareness for everybody. Then another issue is the question of ransomware attacks.
Yeah,
Carl, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, we just recently had a ransomware attack on Software AG, publicly traded German software vendor, which was, unfavorable, of course. And I think also that only few people have visibility on the number of ongoing attacks we have at all times. So I remember a meeting at Deutsche Telekom in their internet coordination center, where we saw like numbers on large walls, and one number said 600,000 attacks. And I asked, okay, that's the monthly summary. No, he said it's a daily summary of attacks on German networks from Russia only. So there's a lot of ongoing, I would say, bad weather around us. And I think it's also interesting to look at, what could the impact be, and when does the impact occur? And I remember a story. I'm not naming the company, but just recently I had a chat with an M&A lead from a DAX company, and the discussion was, around that they acquired a smaller company, and the day after the closing, there was a cyber attack on that small acquired company, just due to the fact that, there might be more, more interesting data, more interesting things to spy on, more money maybe as a ransom, etc. So I think the threat is real, and also M&A kind of sets a bigger stage, very often higher visibility, maybe higher premiums for attacks in general. So I think everybody has to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think to add to that, ransomware is definitely the most popular form of attack at the moment. I think historically, when malware was prevalent, or kind of service disruption from malicious actors was the main way of attacking businesses, there wasn't really a goal. It was more for kind of personal respect and just to cause disruption. But now criminals have kind of understood that, okay, I can get paid at doing this. And unfortunately, there is for businesses, you have to weigh up. If you are hit by a ransomware attack, you do weigh up the risk appetite to paying the fee, because can you afford to be out of action for a period of time if your service is based on 24/7? So what does the recovery time objective cost against paying a ransom which is very achievable for you as a business? So this is why, the fact is people and companies do pay ransoms. They just don't, this is not, I can guarantee that they do pay ransoms. And of course that just spurs on more and more attacks to happen to more and more companies. So it's a threat that's not going away, because criminals, if they can make easy money, then they'll continue to do that. And you're right to say the M&A landscape is favorable, because it is. When two companies merge or companies separate, it's the point of weakness when oversights happen, because typically speed is the key driver. And companies don't want to let markets know, because it will impact the stocks, and everything has to happen in secret. So if any of these secrets ever get leaked, it's a from a malicious actor's point of view, it's a fantastic opportunity to start attacking and asking for ransom, because people don't want to disrupt that process.
Yeah. What are the drivers? If you look at individuals, they have limited instruments for high-tech attacks. They see money. But as Karl already mentioned, we have, for instance, Russia. So these are national attacks. Is this a type of cyber war leading to the industry and to specific targets?
I mean, it can be. It depends. It depends what your industry is in. If you're in oil, for example, and you're let's just say you run oil out of the Middle East, and you're buying a pipe route across the Middle East into Europe. I mean, there will be geographical and kind of geopolitical interests for other countries to get involved, and people often blame Russia. The IP addresses often come from Russia. But unfortunately, you can be anywhere in the world. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be Russia. Mm-hmm. There are companies and there are people that want to disrupt the market, for sure, to benefit. I mean, if you can make some quick, easy money by shorting the market in some way, by putting in place fraudulent ideas or disrupting service, then you will really impact that market share, and you can buy cheap. Mm-hmm. So there's definite bonuses for disrupting.
Mm-hmm. Are these mainly the bad countries like Korea and Russia? They're also not so far from each other what concerns the political beliefs.
Look, I mean, it can never be confirmed, sure. I mean, I think that there's attacks from everywhere, even America, right? So even the UK. So okay, yeah. I think, unfortunately, there are criminals everywhere, and you can't just be deemed to see, looking at Russia. You've got to look everywhere, right? You've got to prove that you're not being negligent as a minimum, and you've got to really look to protect your investment.
Mm-hmm. Now, the number you mentioned is really dramatic, and I think this should give a certain idea for the audience in this conference. And I would like to invite you, the audience, for the poll you can see. And while we discuss, we then will see how your evaluation is. We have two questions. First is, how important is cybersecurity for your company, so specific your company, during M&A? And the second question is, how likely are threats from cybersecurity for your companies? As we are, our conference is directed mainly at German companies and the German Mittelstand. I think it's you should reflect your degree of exposition. So looking at the other side, what are the typical risks and main mistakes which opens the doors for cyber attacks during M&A transactions? What about the question of lack of attention?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Paul already mentioned. Very often you see that the sheer speed and amount of work in other areas kind of pulls the attention away from cybersecurity issues coming from the software industry. I mean, that's one of our key topics, obviously, to look at, but it doesn't have the same priority in other industries, while the threat is the same. So it really depends on, I would say, the corporate awareness and also the corporate willingness to dive into these issues. Very often it's more like, okay, let's go buy this company, and then later, we clean it all up, and later might be too late, as we stated already using our examples.
Yeah. How do you see the question of education and training? Is it a training question?
So no, I think to also add to what Carl was saying as well is that we use the term cybersecurity very freely. People don't actually quite know what it means, and I agree, it doesn't really mean anything, right? So it's much bigger than just one thing. So the way I think about security is that you have information security in one hand and you have cyber defense in another hand, and they're two completely separate pieces of knowledge here, right, and buckets of skill. So within information security, you're protecting your corporate IP, you have data privacy, you have governance, risk compliance, you have training, awareness, you have the structure of how security is governed, okay? And then in cyber defense, you have kind of your offensive and your defensive architectures, you have your testing, you have your protection mechanisms, you have your monitoring solutions, etc. So there's really quite a lot to take in. We banner it under cybersecurity, but there's a huge map of different things to contend with. So training, and user awareness is crucial, and we're finding that more and more through the pandemic, because especially in the UK, we've sent everyone home. And that's really widened the corporate threat landscape for a lot of businesses. They weren't skilled and prepared for protecting users at home. You've put them outside of the control of the IT help desk and the security service monitoring, and you've put them on a VPN outside of maybe not even on a VPN, on an Office 365 kind of connection, which just uses the internet to get to corporate mail. You've opened up Pandora's box, really. And how do you protect against that? So user awareness has been key, especially this year, right? And then when you come to actually think about, okay, so what have I got to take, using Carl's example, when we come to buy a smaller company, for an example, because it makes sense, there's always a rush to integrate them, because they've obviously created something that you can't create internally. That's why you're buying it, due to speed. And the lack of diligence and understanding the new security threat landscape that you're going to be onboarding as a business is often overlooked. So, for example, if you're a German-based business and you're buying an Israeli-based business, how well do you know the Israeli cyber landscape? Well, that's a question that only really you would know unless you've really done your diligence on the Israeli market, and it's often overlooked. So, for me, the biggest pitfall that companies currently suffer is that they're not aware of the future threat landscape that they're going to be onboarding.
Yeah, cyber implies that the source of risk is far away, but the source of risk can be in your company itself or in the target company. Could you tell a little bit about that? I heard that a larger share of attacks come from internals.
Yeah, I mean, I think corporate espionage is definitely a lot. It is on a lot of CISOs' agendas these days, and protecting the inside of the network is just as important as protecting the outside of the network. What I've definitely come to see, and I've got a bit of a war story on this, is when it was just before GDPR came into effect a couple of years ago. There were malicious actors that deliberately breached networks and sat dormant for at least 6 months in anticipation of GDPR coming to effect. And on the week before GDPR was announced, the attackers announced themselves to say, look, I've been leaking data out of your network for the last 6 months. I pretty much own your business. Unless you pay me X, Y, Z, and a big figure, I'm going to come out and completely throw you under the bus when it comes to the big GDPR fine. So you've got a choice. You either pay me small figures now, or you're going to pay the regulators big figures. And also, you've got the opportunity to reduce the brand impact that you're going to suffer. So what that story tells me is that we need to understand that what's going on the internal network, because that person had broken through the perimeter somehow, and it wasn't detected. However, if we do continually monitoring on the internal network, it probably would have been picked up. So, and if you put in place the measures to prevent internal kind of lateral movement, segmentation of the network, least privilege, etc., it could have been avoided. In this war story, that malicious actor got paid rather handsomely in cryptocurrency, never to be seen again.
Yeah.
Looking at the people who attack, the other side is what are the standards to act against the cyber risks? There are German standards, there are international standards, and as we are Germans and international people here, the first question is to Karl Popp. There is the German BSI standard. What is your opinion about that?
Well, what we have there is, I think, interesting in our industry. I would say the most important standards are US standards, and Paul can elaborate on these. We basically are, collaborating with, other software vendors to find out about, what is the typical thing you should be doing, for example, during due diligence. And, some of the requirements we have there come from standards and are kind of in the list of security-related requirements of these standards. So I don't know the standard by heart, but I know that, many of the items that we check relate to certain standards, and the standards also allow to communicate any issues better, because the standardized definition helps you to transport what's gone wrong. And just to give an example, in the due diligence, we look at, for example, application security. So we normally buy software companies, cloud software companies, and they offer applications to their customers, and there are tools that we use in due diligence to scan for certain security vulnerabilities, which we need to have fixed before closing, usually, to make sure that, in this area, there is enough, let's say, compliance to more or less our standards of things that we see important in the area of security. So that's, my view on things. We don't cling to standards, but we reference them to make use of the clear definition as well, to know what's being required from targets during due diligence and after that.
I heard that the German BSI standard is more or less only on information security, so it doesn't cover the whole scope to be covered, but international NIST standard and others do more. So Paul, as you have a very broad experience, what is your experience on these standards? Do you work along standards, and what is the best thing to base upon?
Yeah, so to go back to the beginning part of your question, the German BSI, you're correct, is to say it is very information security focused. And you remember when I was saying about information security and cyber defense, they're two different things. The BSI very much looks at this area, which does need to happen. It's a very important area, but it doesn't holistically fix the problem. And it is a standard, right? And so is the ISO 27001 standard. They are things you have to credentialize against to qualify. Okay, and then you can become certified by a governing body. Whereas I think what you're talking about is a framework, right? Where we have kind of industry-leading frameworks from the likes of OWASP and NIST, for example, which is a US leading cybersecurity framework. These frameworks are not anything you can get credentialized against. They are guiding. It's a guiding model to best align to, and the reason why they're kind of preferred is because you can show that you're on a journey with a framework. You can't show that you're on a journey with a standard because it's black and white. You either have it or you don't. Whereas with a leading framework, you can suggest that you're 50% on your way. You're 50% covered, where you have a 50% gap against best practice. So, and I find that the frameworks definitely cover the holistic picture. So, and like I said with OWASP, OWASP is a fantastic guiding network of information. People often believe that it's just the top 10 of open web application vulnerabilities, which is not true at all. They provide guidance for application security, mobile security, API security. They are the one-stop shop, in my opinion, for understanding cutting-edge leading frameworks. So definitely try to align to OWASP and NIST, but it really does depend on where you operate. A lot of European companies like to lean towards the ISO standards because it is very much a European-driven standard, whereas the NIST is governed out of the US, so it's very much aligned to US practices. So it does depend on where you operate. I mean, not every business operates the same operating model. Like a retail outlet can't be the same as an energy giant. They're completely different operating models and have different threat vectors. So you have to choose the best standard and the best framework which suits your operating model.
Mm-hmm. Now I come to another level of question, maybe the legal side. Standards, as I see and I heard, are frameworks, but and so it's the base. But in addition to that, it needs your intelligence, your knowledge of your business, the knowledge of the countries being part of it. Are you rather sure, or what would you advise, or which people would you take in bringing this knowledge for arriving a high standard for cybersecurity and M&A?
I think you're on mute, Carl. Shall I answer this one? As I think Carl's on mute.
Yeah, please. Carl is mute.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll answer it. So, yeah. So, of course, you have to understand your geographical landscape on where data flows in and flows out of your business. I think that is key. And what we're seeing a lot more of in a risk perspective is third-party risk and supply chain risk. So who is attached to your business, what they control, what they process information-wise from your business is very, very important. And your legal counsel teams and your data protection teams will hopefully be well educated in what that does. But in terms of aligning to a legal framework, it does depend on where you operate, as we said. So if you're in Europe, obviously GDPR is a huge thing to abide by and make sure you comply by. And best practice would be to be independently assessed. You can't really credentialize in terms of certify yourself in regard to being 100% GDPR compliant, but you can definitely become independently assessed and have legal representation to suggest that you are in best place to handle requests and understand exactly where your data workflow sits. If you're a payment processor and it comes to storing credentials of payment for processing payment, you obviously conform to PCI DSS, and that is an external standard body which you do need to conform to. So there are independent legal assessors and accreditations to abide by. If you operate in America and you have kind of information flow across the states, you have to conform to a few things. So individually, each state does hold different forms of data protection. However, the most prevalent at the moment is the CCPA, which is the Californian Privacy Act. It's very much similar to GDPR. You can become independently assessed. And also Sarbanes-Oxley is huge in financial markets as well. So understanding your requirements to fulfill and your legal position is very, very key. And we always advise getting independent legal counsel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Carl still has problems for listening us, and yeah, not his microphone on. So this brings me to the next step of discussion, namely the question of cyber due diligence. I think this is one of the measures to be taken to manage cyber risks. Due diligence is an issue, a general issue. Coming back to the legal side, the CEO is responsible for the problems he has identified, but also for the problems he did not identify, so as to show that he has done everything to cope with these risks. And this might also specifically apply for cyber risk management, so for cyber due diligence. So cyber due diligence should be included in due diligence. Could you a little bit elaborate on how this should look like?
Sure. Now, there are two forms of diligence which are handled differently, and that would be depending on your scenario. So if you're on a buy-side ticket, so you're a business acquiring another business for whatever scenario, that's one form of diligence. And also if you're representing the sell side, as in you're potentially carving out a part of your, or you're looking to raise capital within yourself, so you're carving out part of your business to then sell, that's a different form of due diligence. So they both tend to look at the same kind of topics, but they are focused in different ways. So from a buy side ticket, it's understanding what you don't know. Okay, there's a famous saying that you can't control what you don't know, and so it's having visibility and having understanding of what you're about to acquire. So the diligence strategy needs to be aligned with the future business strategy. So the business are acquiring this, this new business for a particular reason, and you have to understand what that journey and that strategic movement is before you get involved with your cybersecurity strategy position. Once you understand that, you can then go to the target business, and then you can start to understand and align that strategy with their current corporate cybersecurity strategy and see how they differ. Typically, it will differ because you'll probably be in geographical landscapes and have different threat landscapes, and you probably model risk differently. You probably different size businesses, and you probably invest in different areas and in different sizes. So aligning and understanding what you're going to get involved in is one of the biggest things to try and understand. And then also understand kind of what protection mechanisms are currently in place. Does the business have a reactive or a proactive stance to security? Is the person in charge of security reputable? Is he credible? Is she credible? Right? Do they? What's the plan for them moving forward? Because typically, if you're going to be acquiring someone, there's only room for one CISO in the business going forward. So you don't want to start with a disgruntled employee knowing that they're going to lose their job because they simply just go and find another job, and then you lose all the data in the business. So you've got to really handle the scenario very, very carefully and understand that risk picture going forward. Before you actually come to integrate, it's very, very important to have performed multiple diligence tests and to make sure that the policies that your current business adopt have been enforced onto the new business so that they at least abide by your security protocols.
Mm-hmm. One issue I heard from the pre-discussions with you is the issue of conducting security scans. Could you elaborate a little bit about such scans? I come back to to an experience I had in my M&A life, namely the more you know the industry you're in, the more you know the region you're in, the more you know things and risks, not only on cyber, but the further you go beyond your business, your country, the less you are informed. And I feel that this might be similar in cyber security and cyber management. So based on this, how should security scans look like?
So, of course, if you're looking to acquire a business, we highly recommend getting an external view of what can be learned about the target business from the internet. I think that understanding that picture gives a very, very open and interesting view of how they conduct cybersecurity practices within the business. You can often tell that if a business has a very solid perimeter, they probably have good internal practices. However, if you do perform passive scans on internet-facing infrastructure, you can understand via kind of banner grabbing and reconnaissance to an extent kind of what security protocols are facing the internet, and you can learn quite a lot about the business and how they conduct security. I think within a merger and acquisition diligence process, it's very difficult to actually get the allowance and the agreement to perform intrusive scans on the business. It's against the law, and you can't just go and perform a scan without acceptance and authorization. I think if you're in an exclusive ticket and the exclusivity is there and you're going through the TSA period, yes, you can definitely perform intrusive scans because you will be given that exclusivity, and that's highly recommended because you can really understand the threat landscape that way and understand what active vulnerabilities are currently on the network. But if you're in a bid war, or you're in an open bid and multiple companies are looking to acquire the same business, you simply won't get that access, and you'll have to perform non-passive scans, which is non-intrusive. But you can still learn a lot. You can learn about email security. You can learn about TLS encryption. You can learn about kind of patching cadences, all from the internet. And it's a really interesting piece to learn because it's exactly what a malicious actor does in the first round of trying to hack your business. It's the reconnaissance phase of the attack protocol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Karl, as I see your microphone might work again, are you ready? Are you here again, visibly and audibility?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. So I go on to you with this same question. An issue I always, an experience I always had is what are you allowed to do after signing pre-closing and what only later? I think this is also an issue which has an importance for what you can do in cyber risk assessment. So the question is, what can you do from the outside, not penetrating the company, and what can you do from the inside? Could you a little bit elaborate on this from your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, let's start with due diligence. So everything that's pre-signing. So I cannot tell you all the secrets, but we are also doing a number of security scans, but it's not done by SAP people, but by third-party service providers that scan for vulnerabilities in the applications, that scan for servers of the target which are exposed to the internet if they are like on the latest security patch. And so we're also looking for answers in the due diligence, how the target uses a secure software development lifecycle, where security is like one key priority, and ask for their general security practice. What we also do is we use a third-party provider to look for open source software used in the products of the target. There are catalogs out there of security vulnerabilities in open source products. So that's basically the catalog of things we do in due diligence already. And fortunately, we have usually very cooperative targets who are willing to fix things, no matter if it's like after signing or after close, but they see, we have some issues here and they would like to fix it. What we usually do after closing, or less immediately after closing, is a penetration test. So we hire white hat hackers, have them try to invade the network and maybe also try to hack the products of the target to see, to go from a, let's say, more general security scan in due diligence, where you look for certain spots where there could be attacks, to a more organized, way of trying to get into the network, either through one of the security vulnerabilities that have been found, or in a combination of different other things we have there. And we also have, let's say, an ongoing practice in software development to look for vulnerabilities which we install, as well as the secure software development lifecycle. And that's, at least part of the, I would say, software product related things we are doing in due diligence already, and some, after closing.
I've got a war story which has just come after hearing what you just said. It's sprung to mind. So to put it into context, out of the kind of the 200+ deals that I've worked on in the past couple of years, we've only ever stopped 2, right, from going ahead because of finding something which isn't fixable. So one of the accounts was that we did do an external scan, and the external scan identified an Oracle database that wasn't patched, and it had been open to a vulnerable piece of software for I think it was up to 2 months, and it was still open at the time. We were able to understand kind of what exploit could have been put onto that box, that piece of infrastructure, and what could have been exfiltrated. And it turned out that by running our test, we were able to identify exactly what could be pulled out, and it was the corporate IP of one of their applications. It was the full source code, and this business, the value of its business was based in its application data. So in order to, this was a private equity deal, but I mean, in order to appease the investors, we scanned the deep and dark web for potential sale data, and we were able to identify after a couple of days that the source code was sitting on a dark web forum for sale, and quite cheaply, a lot cheaper than the actual business is worth. And it completely devalued the deal, and the private equity firm at the time had to pull out of the deal, and then the lawsuit took place from the corporate to try and find out who exactly had breached and was selling their corporate IP. So it's valuable in itself. If that business had progressed without doing that form of diligence, they would have purchased the business without a doubt. And all of their source data and corporate data was probably sold multiple times over to Chinese competitors, Russian competitors, whoever doesn't mind taking advantage of these things. So yeah, just an interesting one. It definitely highlights the need for understanding from a security perspective.
Yeah. So we talked about big cases like the Marriott case, big worldwide cyber wars, etc. And now our conference is specifically on mid-sized companies, and the question then is, what could be the main takeaways for our specific audience? So the question is, what could be gold standards for mid-sized companies in M&A, cyber security management? One after the other. First, let's begin with putting this question to Paul.
So unfortunately for mid-sized companies, I think they need to do exactly the same as large-sized companies. I think from a security perspective, it's just as valuable. But the number one thing to know is you've got to understand, if you're buying someone, right? If that's the scenario, if you're buying someone, you've got to understand the future threat landscape you're going to be onboarding. You need to threat model what that means for you, your business, and do you need a new budget for it? I mean, you may be entering a new geographical location, which is going to, which you've got to now protect. It's still within your day job. You've got to now protect it. You've got to understand what it's going to cost you, what you need to protect it, because your perimeter of protection just got double as big. And if you don't understand what you're going to be controlling, you are going to find yourself in a bit of a spot of bother.
Mm-hmm. Next question on this topic would be to Karl. Karl, it's also a question of competence management. So in a big company, you have many competencies in your house, and the smaller, the less. So the question is, what would you advise to a smaller company in competence management? What should they buy in? Do they have the competence to manage outside competencies, which is also a question. What is your opinion about that? Because you also did very small acquisitions. I think you have a broad experience between broad, big and small.
Yeah. I mean, you have the option to take the target off the internet and shut down the IT. And that's maybe not a very good option, although it's very secure, but you don't want to go there, right? So I think for smaller and medium-sized companies, it might be interesting to, on one hand, get advice from competent consulting companies. And secondly, there are also companies out there who provide security as a service. They are more or less, let's say, in very general terms, a firewall between a target and the internet. You could put it like between the internet and the target operations to basically inherit, I would say, sizable and also very advanced approach to security from such vendors. Because to come to a certain level of security takes time. And the question is if you want to take the risk of, spending another 6 months to get the infrastructure, get the servers updated, etc. You might not have the will or the time to wait another 6 months to get to an acceptable level of security. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, I think one thing to add to what Karl was saying there is don't rush, because it's a lot easier to manage stakeholder expectation at the beginning rather than try and fix when it's gone wrong. Often there's a time milestone which you have to meet. You need to kind of stand back, understand the business strategy, understand the hypothesis of why the investment is taking place, and then put your security hat on and say, look, okay, how am I going to protect my current business from joining with this business? Because once you do join, it's very difficult to break it apart and then add security in. So yeah, definitely think from a strategic point of view exactly how you're going to put in place the protection mechanisms up front.
Mm-hmm. I think audience listening to us all have experience in due diligence or in M&A management in general, but presumably less experience in cybersecurity, and so little experience in what it might cost and what it should cost, what should be invested for cybersecurity management during the M&A case and after, because I heard that there are maybe attacks a long time after the closing, for instance.
Yeah, day 1 to day 100 is a very, very important time. And that's when, so pre-deal, your pre-assessments have to outline the strategy, right? And you have to make sure the TSA agreements that get put in place are definitely of benefit to whoever you are, right? So try and get the TSA to match exactly the way you want the business to work. And it can't be run by an IT person, right? Because security and IT, whilst people believe they're very, very similar, they're completely different. For example, when you come to split, let's just say we're going through a carve out and you're splitting 2 businesses, okay? If you want to split an Oracle environment, okay, you will say, okay, 50% staying with the old business and 50% going with the new business. We just need to stand up 2 environments, get the licensing right. That's exactly how it works. However, from a security perspective, let's just say you've got an active monitoring system. The company that's staying is based in the US and the company that's going is based in Germany. Well, the US company are getting hit by ransomware 1,000 times a day, but the German company only 100 times a day. Well, then the split's not equal. It's only if you understand that threat landscape that you can actually get the funding right, get the responsibility right, get the strategy right. Because if you're buying this company and in the TSA agreement you've just done a straight split, you're going to be investing a lot of money in one thing which is not needed in a big way. So it's really understanding from a strategic point of view what you're getting involved in.
Mm. You as an advisor, what is the typical purse clients should open for a contract making with you, depending perhaps on the size and complexity and risk assessment? There might be some basic data on which you estimate what it might cost.
I'd love to be able to give you a pricing a pricing catalog, but it really, there's so many different things that you need to take into consideration. You've got different industries, you've got different size, you've got different kind of price investments, you've got different scenarios, buy side, sell side, carve out, divestment, integration. It really does depend on how much effort is required. And what you're getting involved in. If you're getting involved in something that let's just say you're an energy business buying an energy business, well then you partly know what you're getting involved in. However, if you're an energy business buying a retail business, well then that's probably an area where you probably need to spend a bit more money and a bit more time and investment understanding what that threat landscape is going to mean for you. Mm-hmm. And if you operate in America and you're buying somewhere in Japan, well, that's completely different to buying another American business, right? So it has to be put into context, and it has to be put into context with time. Time is often the real driver for money. If you want an assessment done in 2 weeks, it's going to cost you, a large percentage more if you're going to give yourself a month to do it. So it depends on your current scenario and what you're willing to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Quite clear. I think this is also an experience we have in normal M&A cases. So the similar rules. Now we have come to the time where we would like to invite the audience to put some questions. I did not get some questions through the chat. I do not know if they can do it orally, but at least if not, I would invite everybody to put questions now we might answer, and to answer to our poll we might have as a takeaway from our discussion here. Meanwhile,
somebody in the moderation panel, Anton Furtmeier, we could let in.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see what he would like to talk about. I try to let him in. Didn't really work.
How cool can I manage to get him in? Moderating panel. No, I do not have an option for managing.
I think if there's any questions, just put it in the chat, the event chat, if you have a question. It can be in German or English.
Yeah, please, yeah. Yeah, okay, everybody is invited. Please use the chat, the written chat, and write in your questions. In the meantime, we could expand a little bit our discussion. As the last item was the question in which industry you are, and do you go into new businesses now in our times? We have major changes, digital businesses, we have data-driven businesses, we have platforms, we have other spheres of businesses coming up. do these new ways of doing business have a specific implication on cyber management?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I think that the dependency in, for example, in a globally connected supply chain implies that, you know, everybody who's involved has a certain, let's say, minimum level of security applied, which, you know, allows you to, you know, work based on this global supply chain without having to fear that, you know, one of the hops in the supply chain might just be, you know, breached, or might just be not who you wanted to talk to or to send orders to. So the more your business is connected and dependent on others, as well as the level of automation that you have in your business, and you basically, and that's the case for SAP in many cases, and you're basically depending your business on running IT systems, then you have to have, you know, an appropriate high level of security applied, and security measures and reactions to incidents up and running in your company.
Yeah, what I see in the actual situation is that there are many cases which are short-term, more short-term directed. There are digital networked businesses, and we see more corporations and joint ventures, for instance. Does this have another implication for M&A and for cyber risks? Because the companies are opening up, less closed. Is this opening up a door for cyber attacks?
So it's a good opportunity for attackers to definitely take advantage of the situation. I think that often if you're buying someone who's maybe a startup and their digital journey is really by far in the future to what your still on-prem legacy-based business is running, connecting the two businesses often causes a lot of problems, and the business that's currently running the legacy stuff often uses this as an excuse to transform digitally, and then start to accelerate digitalization of applications and product suites to match what you've currently bought to get its effectiveness fully. And this acceleration is often where things are overlooked, because there's lots of money being invested, there's lots of people involved, and it's the race against time. And unfortunately, security takes time. Understanding what it means for your business and putting in place the correct protection mechanisms is key. So yes, it's a very, very interesting time for attackers to sit and hold tight, especially if they've already breached the weaker kind of startup, because typically what I've kind of seen in my experience is that the more juvenile the business, the more at risk they are, because security isn't top of their mandate. They've just tried to get their business up and running so they can sell it at a profit and get out. So what we see malicious actors sitting dormant on the networks, waiting to be merged with a bigger corporate to then release their payload, which will come in the form of a ransomware attack, where they can actually get money out of the situation. So yeah, it is an increased risk, and it's something that the companies need to be aware of. I mean, it's happening more and more. It never used to happen. It never used to be a topic. It used to be tax FDD, ITDD, but now this is a real threat, and you can get not only fined, you can be suffer from brand damage. I've seen people not want to shop with certain vendors because then they're just being negligent with customer data. It's a problem, and effective diligence will definitely give you a lot more insight into the risks that you're going to be onboarding.
What we also see, maybe to accentuate something positive, is that if we look at smaller software companies that have large customers, they are usually forced to have a higher level of security by their customers. So that's relating to what I said regarding to the supply chain, to the dependency, that large customers are basically requesting a certain level of minimum security from their partners, suppliers, etc., which raises the overall level of security also in smaller software companies working with the large corporates.
Is it a specific risk for a small-sized German company? We are always inviting those in order to beginning the transformation to work together with startups. Are startups more risky? They are very often changing their goals, their direction. So there are two ways of risks: startups by itself and changing the business, and changing opens even more doors. Is this an issue for cybersecurity?
Well, if you look at the software business as a whole, we have basically two buckets. One is the cybersecurity software companies, and they are, have a good awareness of what business they are in, and then there's everybody else, and especially in, let's say, a venture capital funded high growth business, it's all about, growing and, pushing products forward. We have a massive use of open source there, which might open up security risks. So the typical picture is in venture-funded small, high-growth software companies, which are not from the cybersecurity space, that there's a lack of security practice, I would say, and also due to the high pressure on growth, not just enough time to care for it, even if you have the awareness that we should be doing something, but it's not a number one priority in small, high growth companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are coming to the end because we are approaching 4:00 p.m. So far, our colleagues did not bring up questions or contributions, and not an evaluation on about cybersecurity, how they assess it. So this might be a good sign as well, because this might mean that the questions we raise are interesting and hopefully good messages. So as a last wish to both of you, Paul and Karl, could you try to sum up an advice to our mid-sized based corporate audience, summarizing a message from your side, a final message out of this workshop?
Two messages. One is get help from experienced advisors on cybersecurity, and secondly, and that should be hopefully already in place, have a maximum awareness for GDPR related issues. That's my two reminders I have for everybody.
Yeah. Paul, same question to you.
So, in a nutshell, understand your future threat landscape to protect your new business. That's the key message. The diligence process is important from a security perspective. Understand what you're getting involved in, and have a voice in security, because you've got the choice to really either have an opinion or not have an opinion, and it's better to fix it up front than not to, than retrospectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I might sum up from my side, and the message would be first, the novelty of this field implies to go in more deeply, and secondly, the quantity of attacks and the growth rate of attacks is so high that those people who attack might more and more address mid and smaller sized transactions. And so my advice to everybody in our audience would be careful, be aware. And I think as this is the first time we talked about in such a group about this issue, we should further develop and offer and co-work and transfer knowledge about this. And I think this could be a question of both of us, Karl and myself, from the German M&A Association. But as we are a part of the worldwide community, and as I know, for instance, that the legal situation in Great Britain and the openness of the English-speaking world market gives us a much broader scope of possibilities. I would very strongly further invite Paul and perhaps further colleagues to further cover this topic and try to transfer knowledge, because the existence of our organization is only based on the transfer and the knowledge exchange we offer to our members. So many thanks to you, Paul, that you have helped us and opened your experience on your extremely many cases, and good luck for the future. And Karl, the same as well. I'm very grateful always to talk with you specifically as you work on both sides, on the practical side and on the research side and on the publishing side. So thanks to everybody for today, and looking forward to further exchanges on this topic and other topics.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.
Bye.